सो एवरीवन वापस से हम लोग आ जाते हैं अपने सेशन में अभी के। और गोल्ड का मूव देख सकते हैं 1740 से 1752 तक के लेवल्स बनाते हुए दिख रहे हैं। इस टाइम पे मार्केट में इतनी चेंजेस नहीं देखने को मिलते हैं, आज देखने को मिल रहा है। इसके पीछे रीजन यही है कि जैसे कि मैंने आप लोग से कहा था, फेड चेयर जेरोम पवेल स्पीक है आज 7:30 बजे से, हम लोग को वही देखने को मिल रहा है और उसी पे हम लोग का मेन फोकस है आज का। उसको डिस्कस करने से पहले एक बार हम लोग देख लेते हैं गोल्ड के प्राइसेस हम लोग के 1740 से 1753 तक के लेवल्स बनाते हुए। इस टाइम पे जरूर ऐसा कुछ हुआ है जिसकी वजह से एक बार गोल्ड स्पाइक मारते हुए दिखा है। हम लोग एक बार देख लेते हैं स्टेटस।
Irrespective of COVID, lack of transportation, lack of stable housing, having a criminal justice background, struggling with substance abuse. It has been encouraging to see what some businesses here in Northeast Ohio are doing to address some of these challenges. Some of the things that we see: employers expanding their hiring pool, engaging with community partners and the public works system to build on-ramps, earn and learn programs, internships, and apprenticeship models. For example, embracing returning citizens as a target talent pool, developing customized training programs with a commitment to hire and to support these candidates' professional growth. Emphasizing job quality. It's more than just about compensation. Thinking job design to reduce stress and to value workers. Eliminating certain screening criteria that are unrelated to work and present artificial barriers to connect to work, and like the requirement to be nicotine free to work at a hospital. Our hope is that the recognition of the value of this untapped talent will lead to further investment in closing the opportunity gap, lasting change, and creating and sustaining more jobs, family sustaining jobs for all our workers in the community. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jill. Any questions for Jill before we move on?
I'm just curious because my husband and I drove to Delaware because our daughter decided to put her house on the market. So we drove, down one side of Michigan, up the other, and through Ohio and Pennsylvania and Maryland. And it just seemed like everywhere we went, there are jobs out there, but the story that Jill's telling of the disconnect is really difficult. I mean, from a Panera Bread that opened 2 hours late because employees didn't show up in Saginaw, Michigan, to, it was just, as we talk to people across the country, it seems like finding employees is very difficult. And if it's okay, there's a program called, I think, Shelters to Shutters in the multifamily industry. And they're trying to put those people that are coming out of incarceration into jobs. And so if you don't know about them, might be a good connection.
I think we should proceed. Our next speaker is Gina Dingham. Gina is an expert in multifamily housing and founder of Everest Real Estate Advisors. Gina combines more than 25 years of industry experience and expertise with market research to provide commercial real estate solutions to a broad range of clients, including local, regional, and national owners and developers and equity holders. Gina, how would you characterize the demand for multifamily housing right now? Are you seeing any notable shifts in demand, for example, urban versus suburban, or large metro versus smaller? And how has the pandemic affected your outlook for housing supply and construction activity in these different areas?
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me today. I appreciate being here. Multifamily is as strong as it's ever been on about any metric that you choose. And I can empathize with the story on Arizona. Arizona is a very hot market right now, as is Dallas, and markets that are. I'll just back up a little bit. The demand is strong from renters and from investors. So on the capital market side, there's a lot of money chasing yield, chasing deals, and because multifamily is performing well, a tremendous amount of institutional capital is coming into the market. That's causing cap rate compression or prices to increase pretty dramatically. And it it's playing into the rental rates that we were talking about. I mean, fund managers, whether they're pension fund managers or life companies, have to put their money somewhere, and so they're looking for markets that are performing well, and they too want to make a yield for the people they're representing. Biggest shift probably is away from some of the traditional gateway cities, San Francisco, Seattle, New York, and investment into smaller secondary and tertiary markets, and some smaller, I mean, they would not even fit into a definition of secondary or tertiary. I talked to somebody this week that was building in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is, I think, a pretty small town. It's been a long time since I've been there, but institutional money doesn't usually go to Boise or Grand Rapids or, you know, the smaller cities that we're seeing. And so developers want to put product in those cities because they don't have enough housing units for the people that can work remotely that want to move there. And so we're seeing a lot of construction activity and investment in many smaller secondary, tertiary markets. And the biggest need they have, though, we're just underhoused as a country. I mean, we need probably about 4 million housing units, whether they're single family or multifamily. And so without those units, the supply and demand that we've talked about, there's not enough housing out there. And so housing options, and so prices are going up. We have, you know, most product being built is market rate product because developers almost have to develop market rate in order to have a profit. The cost to build an apartment in the suburbs in Minneapolis, for example, is $200,000 to $225,000 a unit. In an urban area, it would probably be $275,000 to over $300,000, depending. And so it's an expensive proposition, and it's really gotten more so since the pandemic. Supply chain issues are impacting development. Developers have to go out 12 to 18 months now to get appliances for a building. So sometimes buildings are ready to be delivered to renters, but there's no appliances because we weren't anticipating the supply chain problems for appliances. Construction materials have the costs have increased pretty sharply. And so those things all work to, unfortunately, drive up rental rates. On the affordable side, there's a number of programs out there, and people are taking advantage of those programs because when most affordable properties open, there's a waiting list of people to go in, and they're filled, you know, within a couple of weeks of delivery. But we're not really building for what I would call the missing middle of the population because there aren't really subsidies, and I don't know if you need subsidies for it or if, you know, if cities and municipalities could waive some fees to make it a little bit more affordable. But when you look at about a $25,000 price difference between building market rate and what is generally called workforce housing, I mean, most people, usually both couples work or people in the building in the unit work, but with rental rates going up the way they are, it's difficult. And frankly, on the capital market side, with properties trading at 2 caps, which is a 2% cap rate, is really unheard of, and it's very difficult to make a profit there. And so, kind of like what the others said, we seem like we're really on an edge of what can you do to be profitable versus, you know, you have this huge need out there, but developers aren't going to build if they can't make a profit. And so it's an interesting time in the market.
Well, that's certainly the case, Gina. Any question? And thank you for that. Any questions for Gina before we move on to our next speaker?
If not, I would just add that, you know, the low interest rates and massive amount of capital for multifamily has caused the price increases that we're seeing. anything we can do to get new units delivered more quickly is helpful, but yeah, I'll stop.
Thank you very much, Governor Bowman.
Thank you, Vice Chair Clarida. Our next panelist is Mr. Larry Andrews. He's President and CEO of Massachusetts Growth Capital Corporation, or MGCC, whose mission is to create and preserve jobs at small businesses, women and minority-owned businesses, and to promote economic development in underserved gateway municipalities and low to moderate income communities. MGCC also administers the Small Business Technical Assistance Grant Program, which funds the delivery of technical assistance, training in business skills, and access to financing, fostering development and growth of businesses throughout the state. Larry, how have the small businesses you work with fared during the economic recovery? What are the concerns expressed by the businesses you engage with regarding their ability to continue operating? Are they able to hire or retain the employees that they need to operate their businesses?
Thank you, Governor Bowman and Chairman Powell, Vice Chair Clarida. Just amazing that you have this ability to listen, especially during this time, and other governors that are on the line, and especially those that are listening online, because what the Federal Reserve has done and continue to just thank you for your support as we look at the economic effects of COVID and to implement support for those most affected. I do.
ओके सर, जिस तरीके से हम लोग के कोविड की बात की जा रही है, गोल्ड के प्राइसेस पूरी तरीके से अपसाइड रिबाउंड करते हुए दिख रहे हैं। लगातार 6 कैंडल्स हमारी 15 मिनट की कैंडल्स, यानी कि लगातार 1.5 घंटे से हम लोग को अपसाइड मूव देखने को मिल रहा है। आ जाते वापस से एक बार अपने डिस्कशन पे।
I also want to locally thank the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, especially Praval Chakrabarti and Carmen Pinakopoulos for their really unwielding support for under-resourced communities throughout New England. Personally, they're a source of guidance and factual support in addressing economic need. As we all know, economics is a team sport, and getting people engaged in helpful behavior and getting them off the sideline is difficult. But my experience with working cities with the Federal Reserve laid the groundwork for establishing trusted relationships and very valued relationships and partners, which helped me, especially as we look to serve small businesses during COVID. That investment by the Federal Reserve in those partnerships really laid the groundwork for what we've been able to do at Mass Growth Capital, which was through Governor Baker providing funds. We were able to fund $750 million to 15,000 businesses, a majority being minority-owned, women-owned, LGBTQ veterans, and those with physical disabilities. And that really was a way in which we knew that things are different. And we know that COVID has hit businesses differently, some because of industry segments, some because of location, some because of mandates. But we know that most that have been affected have been issues that were prevalent prior to COVID, specifically systematic racial economic inequality. 4 words that describe a generational and historic complex condition of our country with a dark root in money that needs to be undone. Those that live on the poverty line, and that continues, as we've heard from other panelists, that line continues to widen. Immigrant-owned businesses that have language and cultural barriers that are in under-resourced communities, and those that are physically impaired, and then others that are LGBTQ plus veteran-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and those located in gateway cities. Much of what we've heard already. All these groups have some intersectionality, but all have an experience that is vastly different than the majority. This has been borne out time and time again with Federal Reserve small business studies, and most recently with a study conducted by the Coalition for an Equitable Economy, which was actually formed during COVID in Massachusetts and with Mass Inc. It's a very different experience for those communities. And yet, in light of that, and as Chairman Powell first started, the resiliency of small businesses throughout Massachusetts is just remarkable. And yet we do know that there continues to be.
ओके सो जब तक हम लोग इस सेशन को थोड़ी देर बाद देखेंगे, आ जाते हैं अपने डिस्कशन पॉइंट्स पे। एंड वी आर हेयर विद गोल्ड न्यूज किट को, और रिसेंट न्यूज देखते हैं कौन सी आई है और कैसे चेंजेस देखने को मिल रहा है। So gold prices are modestly up in the early US Friday session. Some risk aversion has returned to the marketplace late this week, and that's prompting just a bit for safe haven demand for the yellow metal, as well as some short covering by the short term gold futures traders. A firmer US dollar index on this day is limiting the upside for the precious metal. October gold futures was last up $2.70 at 1750.40. December CMEX silver was last down $0.074 at $22.605 an ounce. Global stock markets were mostly weaker in the overnight trading. The US stock indexes are also pointed to a lower opening when the New York day session begins. There is some keener risk aversion to end the trading week, as the Chinese property giant Evergrande may have missed its $83 billion debt payment that was due Thursday. There were no announcement the payment had been made, so many traders and investors are taking that to mean no payments were made Thursday. There are worries one of the biggest companies in the world's second largest economy, being on the verge of insolvency, could have a contained effect not only in the China but around the globe. History shown that when a financial market contain begins, it's very hard to contain. Mainly, it's a crisis of confidence as traders and investors seek to pull their money out of risk assets, and then the exit doors become closed. Also, it appears the market is taking Wednesday's FOMC meetings result, including Fed Chairman Powell's comment at this press conference, to be more hawkish on US monetary policy than at first reckoned. US Treasury bonds yield have risen the past two trading sessions, hitting the highest level since July. The yield on the benchmark US 10 years Treasury yields note is presently fetching 1.41%. Powell is set to speak at a virtual event along with the other Federal Reserve officials at 10 a.m. EDT Friday. Meantime, the US Congress is debating about how to extend the US debt ceiling. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said the government will run out of money sometime in October. While looming over the marketplace, this situation has played out more than once over recent years, but it could still inject some anxiety into the marketplace if the government actually nears a shutdown. In the overnight news, China's central bank declared all cryptocurrencies transaction to be illegal. Okay, that's the biggest news. चाइना की सारे सेंट्रल बैंक्स ने क्रिप्टो करेंसी के ट्रांजैक्शन को इलीगल बोल दिया है. चाइना's official said the move was made to maintain national security and stock stability. Bitcoin prices are down on the news. The the key outside markets today see the US dollar index firmer. NYMEX crude oil future prices are near steady and trading around $73.35 a barrel. US economy data due to release Friday is light and includes new residential sales. Technically, October gold futures have the slight overall Near-term technical advantage. Prices are in a flattening downtrend on the daily chart bars. Bull's next upside prices objective is to produce a close above solid resistance at 1800. Bear's next near-term downside price objective is pushing future prices below solid technical support at 1700. First resistance is seen at the overnight height of $17.55 and then at Thursday's high of 1774.50. First support is seen at the overnight low of $1741.10 and then at this week's low of 1736.30. The silver bears have to solid overall near-term technical advantage. Silver bulls next upside price objective is close near December futures prices above solid resistance at $23.50 an ounce. The next downside price objective for the bears is closing prices below solid support at $21. First resistance is seen at $23 and then at week's high of 23.15. Next support is seen at $22.455 and then at this week's low of $22.5. एक बार देख लेते हैं MT4 टर्मिनल पे तो हमारी लगातार दूसरी कैंडल भी पूरी तरीके से अप होती है और हमारी नेक्स्ट कैंडल फॉर्मेशन सो गोल्ड के प्राइसेस 1751.59 पे एक दूसरी कैंडल फॉर्मेशन हम लोग का पूरा ध्यान है आज हमारे लाइव न्यूज़ पे बट उसके पहले हम लोग चाह रहे एक बार अपने डिस्कशन पॉइंट्स को देखना सो गोल्ड प्राइसेस रिबाउंड fizzles at Fed reveals tentative timeline to taper. So points to be discussed today: gold retains the series of higher highs, gold spots, US dollar, XAU USD chart. Gold is facing a strong confluence of resistance. Gold XAU USD 4-hour time frame. Sideways trading continues in gold. Eyes on FOMC meeting. Gold XAU USD technical outlook. Support and resistance levels. So the price of gold retains the series of higher highs and lower from earlier this week. At the Federal Opening Market Committee stays on track to increase its holding of Treasury securities by at least $80 billion per month and of agency mortgage-backed securities by at least $40 billion per month. So, and the bullion may take a larger recovery over the remainder of the month as the decision by Chairman Jerome Powell and co-drags on the US Treasury yields. Nevertheless, it seems as though the FOMC is preparing to switch gears later this year as The committee judges that a moderation in the pace of asset purchases may soon be warranted. And Fed officials may lay out a more detailed strategy before the end of this year, as Chairman Powell reveals that the central bank could start tapering its quantitative easing program as soon as the next meeting. So during the press conference, Jerome, Chairman Jerome Powell went on to say that it could be appropriate to wind down the non-standard measure by mid 2022, as the update to the summary of economic projection shows the US economy growing 3.8% next year compared to the 3.3% forecast presented in the June. And speculation for a looming shift in the Fed policy may keep a lid on the price of gold amid the failed attempt to clear the July's high 1834. हम लोग डिस्कस करें उससे पहले हम लोग आ जाएंगे वापस से अपने लाइव सेशन पे और देखेंगे बाकी के एनालिसिस.
Some issues, and many of we've talked about already. Employee and workforce development. I had breakfast yesterday with a landscaping company, Jeff Dodge. He said, it's time that we spent as much time thinking about marketing that we start thinking about retaining and attracting new employees. That's something I think pre-COVID, we talked a lot about marketing, but not necessarily our employees. Landlords and rents, which have been talked about, the unwillingness and understandably so of landlords with their commitments of helping small businesses through this difficult time. I'd like to highlight the supply chain. That has been just something we've heard. I just finished a 25 city and town throughout Massachusetts visits and roundtables with the Secretary of Economic Affairs, Mike Keneally. And the supply chain issue continues to just elude many. Cafe El Dorado in Chelsea, a predominantly Hispanic community. Jenny and Carlos started their bakery and cafe. And she talked to me about a carton of eggs pre-COVID of $8.99 for a carton. It's now $39 for a carton of eggs. Sunny Vu restaurant in Worcester, talking about fry oil. A 5-gallon jug of fry oil previous to COVID was $17, and now it's $50 if you can get it. And so in these communities in which there is no really price elasticity for many of their customers, how do you actually pass on these costs? The other thing is housing. We talked about it, and I'm so glad this is so crucial. There's a housing crisis at all levels, affordable, moderate. The housing crisis is affecting our businesses. We talked about digital divide, and that's not only access but also knowledge, and making sure that those businesses have the ability to go into the internet. And then childcare. Again, this is something that is exacerbated by COVID, and having places in which employees can bring their children. And
Larry, if I could just ask you to wrap up. We're short on time, and then we'd like to try to get to all of our panelists before our deadline. So just some closing comments, and then I'll ask Vice Chair Clarida to introduce our next panelist.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you. And the other thing is I just hope that, we're known as a guiding generation as we look at racial inequality and climate change and pathways for immigrant businesses, and really writing a new path for economic success as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just looking for the mute button. Our next speaker is Dr. Chad Moutre, who is Chief Economist at the National Association of Manufacturers, where he serves as the lead economic forecaster and spokesperson on economic issues. In addition, he is director of the Center for Manufacturing Research at the Manufacturing Institute, which is a social impact arm of the NAM. And he leads efforts there to produce thought leadership data and analysis to business leaders. Chad, please tell us what you see as the most consequential supply chain bottlenecks affecting U.S. manufacturers at this moment. How and when do you think these pressures will begin to ease? And which industries are in inventories particularly low? And is this due mainly to supply or demand factors? Finally, how concerned are manufacturers today about rising input costs?
We can't hear you.
Manufacturers, as you know, are experiencing really strong demand, both in the U.S. and globally. And in fact, in the most recent NAM Manufacturers Outlook survey, 87.5% of respondents said that they were positive about their company's outlook. And while that's down from where it was 3 months ago, which was a 3-year high, it's still a pretty healthy figure. At the same time, manufacturing leaders cited rising raw material costs as their top concern for the third straight quarter, followed closely by the challenges of attracting and retaining a quality workforce, as was mentioned, supply chain disruptions, and the logistics and transportation issues. Interestingly, I asked many of these manufacturers what is the top downside risk to their forecast, right? It's a pretty rosy forecast. And yet the number one issue that they said was their top downside risk was workforce shortages. That was closely followed by some issues I would have thought, actually, supply chain disruptions, cost pressures, and the continued spread of COVID-19, including the Delta variant. On the labor front, manufacturing respondents had the highest expected growth rates for employment and wage growth in the survey's history, which dates to 1997, further highlighting the difficulties in obtaining sufficient workers. Indeed, as you know from the JOLTS data, we have 889,000 job openings in manufacturing right now, an all-time high. Specific to your question, while manufacturing growth remains solid, supply chain bottlenecks are significant, as Larry just noted earlier, holding back even stronger expansions in the sector. Manufacturers continue to cite backlogs of cargoes at the ports, the shortage of truck drivers, and soaring shipping costs as significant impediments. In a just-in-time production environment, this poses a very serious challenge to production and capacity, and quite frankly, the shortage of workers doesn't help that conversation either. While there's been a lot made of the chip shortage in the automotive sector, it is important to note that chips are not just in autos, and you're seeing these shortages impact other segments of the manufacturing sector as well. Certainly if you're a consumer, you've seen this as well, for appliances, electrical equipment, electronics, machinery, and others. Inventory shortages also go beyond motor vehicles, with inventory to sales ratios and very low actually for chemicals, metals, miscellaneous durable goods, and natural gas. Prices for metals, which I continue to hear about from our members all the time, are often cited as a challenge for manufacturers, the result of reduced capacity, both in the U.S. and abroad, combined with very strong demand. These supply chain and logistical issues are likely to extend into next year from the conversations that I've had with manufacturers. It'll take a while, for instance, for the backlog at the ports to work its way through the system, something that's going to be exacerbated by the holiday season and everyone trying to get stuff on the shelves for Christmas and Hanukkah. In addition to that, you also have a lot of other structural hurdles to work through, including the tight labor market, as was mentioned, and the need by just about every sector to find enough workers. This is leading to wage pressures, which companies are pushing up compensation as they're trying to find enough talent to compete. While pricing pressures are likely to stabilize as we move into 2022, assisted by a more favorable base comparison, as you know, it is clear that some of these costs are going to remain pretty elevated relative to pre-pandemic levels, including wages. Once they go up, they are not likely to go back down, and also transportation costs. And core inflation is likely to be a lot hotter than we've become accustomed to. Well, with that in mind, it is perhaps not surprising that so many manufacturers cited that as their top concern, really for all of this year so far. Moving forward, manufacturers will closely watch the price and economic growth data, much like you are, to see what develops. They are cautiously optimistic that supply chain disruptions and inventory issues will improve by mid-2022, with demand continuing to remain strong. Of course, it is also important to note, and we haven't really mentioned it today, the vaccines are important to this conversation as well. I think as we think about whatever that new normal looks like, it's important for us to all be vaccinated, and that's certainly something that the NAM, the National Association of Manufacturers, has been pushing for pretty aggressively over the course of this year.
Chad, thank you for that. As with all the panelists, we could spend a lot more time on that, but in the interest of time, I will hand it off to Governor Bowman. But thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Clarida. Our final panelist is Dr. William Hite. He serves as the superintendent of the School District of Philadelphia, and he's been in that role since 2012. Dr. Hite's career in education has included roles at every level of schooling from K through 12, as teacher, principal, central office administrator, and a superintendent. Bill, could you share with us what the biggest challenges you faced with the start of the 2021 academic school year? What have been the most concerning impacts on students from last year's disruptions to in-school education? And among what age groups and or socioeconomic groups are these impacts most acute? And finally, what adjustments do you believe educators will need to make to address the gaps in learning that have occurred?
Thank you, Governor Bowman, and good morning, everyone. And I don't know if there's enough time to respond to each one of those questions, but I'll try to work them through as quickly as possible. And so, first and foremost, the largest challenge that we face was the fact that many of our young people were out of school or not in person and were engaged in virtual learning for 18 months. And so now we have been back in school for 4 weeks, and we're very excited about that. But in a city like Philadelphia and many of the urban centers around the nation, what we have seen is that COVID and the consequences from COVID have exacerbated many of the inequities and disparities that persist in cities like ours. And we have concentrations of poverty in many areas of our city. And quite frankly, when we first went out, because of the pandemic, we had to make sure we were doing things like other panelists talked about, providing children with meals. Some 11 million meals were distributed just so that our young people could eat. We provided families with medications for their students who no longer had access to those medications. We then had to move to a virtual platform, but unfortunately, well, first and foremost, not all of our students had access to the technology. So then we had to make sure everyone had access to the technology and purchase some 90,000 pieces of technology to distribute. Then we discovered not everyone had access to reliable and high-functioning internet services. And so then working with Comcast and the city and other philanthropic organizations in Philadelphia, we were able to provide that for a 2-year period. Now that we have young people back into schools, we've had to really be focused on many of the social and emotional aspects that many of our young people have experienced as a part of their isolation, the trauma associated with that. And then in addition to that, one thing that we weren't anticipating, and we knew we were going to have challenges with, let's say, bus drivers and transportation, and no matter where you are in the country, you're seeing those challenges. What we didn't anticipate were all of the other supply chain challenges that are a product of not having enough workers or drivers, and those things then impacted our ability to pick up trash, to pick up trash bins, to have food delivered to schools. Yesterday we had one school had 2 of their cafeteria workers who did not report, and so therefore the school didn't have access to the meals that were available in the kitchen because those two individuals did not report to work. And so it's those types of things that are really beginning to impact. And as educators who have been flexible throughout this entire pandemic, one of the things that many individuals are doing now is really finding new ways to engage with young people while also trying to manage their own emotions and their own traumas as a result of the pandemic, as well as the emotions and challenges and trauma of our young people. And I'll just add this, Governor Bowman, is that when you have those types of supply chain types of challenges, let's say you can't get children picked up on a bus, the impact of that challenge is disproportionate to those who are already in deep poverty. And because when those children don't have access to transportation, they can't get to school. And when those young people are at schools where we don't have access to meals or food to distribute, then those families or children don't eat. And so the disparities and income disparities and all of the other disparities as it relates to access to healthcare and nutrition, all of those things are exacerbated as a part of the pandemic and what we have been trying to navigate as a result.
Thank you so much.
ओके सो हम लोग वापस से एक बार आ जाते हैं अपने डिस्कशन पॉइंट पे. Nevertheless, it seems as though the FOMC is preparing to switch gears later this year, as the committee judges that a moderation in the pace of asset purchases may soon be warranted, and Fed officials may lay out a more detailed strategy before the end of the year, as Chairman Powell reveals that the central bank could start tapering its quantitative easing program as soon as the next meeting. During the press conference, Chair Powell went in to say that could be appropriate to wind down the non-standard measure by mid 2022. As the update to the summary of economic projection shows the US economy growing 3.8% next year compared to 3.3% forecast presented in June, and speculation for a looming shift in Fed policy may keep a lid on the price of gold amid the failed attempt to clear the July high 1834. The price of gold may attempt to stage a larger rebound. With that said, the price of gold may attempt to stage a larger rebound over the remainder of the month as it manages to retain the series of higher highs and lows from earlier this week. But the rebound from the August low, a 1682, may turn out to be a correction in the broader trend rather than a change in the market behavior as the FOMC prepared to switch gears. So, price of gold above the 200-day simple moving average. Keep in mind that the negative slope in the 200-day simple moving average 1806 indicates that broader trend for bullion remains tilted to the downside, with a death cross formation taking shape in the August as the relative strength pushed oversold territory. However, lack of momentum to test the March low 1677 generated a textbook buy signal in the RSI as the oscillator climbed back above 30 with the move above 1786, 38.2% expansion. Reason pushing the price of gold above the 200 days simple moving average 1806. The price of gold back towards the Fibonacci overlap. So nevertheless, the rebound from the August low 1682 may turn out to be a correction in the broader trend rather than a change in the market behavior. Amid the failed attempt to clear the July high, and lack of momentum to close above the 1786, the reason may push the price of gold back towards the Fibonacci overlap around 1743 to 1763. The price of gold back towards the Fibonacci overlap first. A break of the monthly low open up the 1690 to 1695 region with a move below the August low. Bring the March low 1677 on the radar. Need a close above the 1786 reason to open the 1816 to 1822 zone with the next area of interest coming in around 1837 to 1847. सो एक बार हम लोग वापस से अपने MT4 टर्मिनल पे आ जाते हैं और गोल्ड का मूव देखते हैं। तो गोल्ड हमारा पूरी तरीके से अपसाइड स्पाइक करते हुए इफ 1752 पे प्राइसेस पूरी तरीके से स्टेबल होते हुए 1752.14 के लेवल्स पे प्राइसेस मूव करते हुए वापस आ जाते हैं डिस्कशन पॉइंट की ओर। सो द प्राइस ऑफ गोल्ड बैक टुवर्ड्स द फिबोनाची overlap. A break of monthly low opens up the 1690 to 1695 region with a move below the August low. Bring the March low on the radar. Need a close above 1786 reason to open up 1816 to 1822 zone with the next area of interest coming in around 1837 to 1847. So sideways trading continues in gold eyes on FOMC meeting. Gold roses midcain on Wednesday as investors awaited the outcome of the US Federal Reserve's policy meeting, which could provide insight into the timing for the reduction of stimulus in the world's largest economy. The opportunity cost of owning non-interest bearing gold would rise if interest rate were to increase in the future. Sideways trading traders were also keeping an eye on events involving China's debt-laden property giant Evergreen, which announced on Thursday that it would pay some bound interest that was due, bringing some respite to the stocks. On Tuesday, the world's largest gold-backed exchange-traded fund, SPDR Gold Trust, saw its holding fall 0.1% to the 1,000.79 tons. It's looked like investors are taking their funds out of gold ahead of FOMC meeting today. Gold XAU USD technical outlook. So gold is currently trading in a positive trend. At 1772 with the next support at 1771. An intraday pivot point is extending this support level and gold has the potential to explode beyond it. As a result, the next immediate resistance for gold remains at 1781 and 1794. So, a violation of 1771 support level opens the gold price to 1760 on the bearish side. Overall, the FOMC will continue to be the key focus as it may assist in influencing future moves in the XEU USD Tuesday. देख सकते हैं 1752.3839. सेवनटीन 52.43 पे एक दूसरी कैंडल मूव करती हुई शॉर्ट रेड कैंडल के साथ. हम लोग थोड़ी देर वापस से अपना जेरोम पवेल का स्पीक देखते हैं कि उसमें क्या चेंजेस देखने को मिल रहे हैं.
So much. I really appreciate your perspectives with all of these very critical and important issues that affect our workers. But I do want to just let Chair Powell wrap up our conversation today if he has the time to do so. So thank you so much for your perspective.
I do have time, and thank you so much for this. You know, we are really living in unique times. I'm old enough to have seen a lot of things, but I've never seen these kind of supply change issues. Never seen an economy that combines, you know, drastic labor shortages with lots of unemployed people and you know, a lot of slack in the labor market. As you were just pointing out, though, you know, one part of it is not so different from other downturns, and that is people with the least resources, least able to bear the burden, were particularly hard hit by this one. So it's a very fast changing economy. It's going to be quite different from the one we see. We hear that right across the board from many of you, and you know, to hear this, for us to be able to hear this from you in real time is enormously valuable. We get tons and tons of data here, but it doesn't really live for us until we hear your stories and what's really going on the ground. So again, we're out of time, but I just want to thank you personally so much for this, and we'll hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
सो हम लोग का पहले स्पीक खत्म हो चुका है. हम लोग देख रहे हैं गोल्ड का मूव 1751.9193 के लेवल पे. और देखेंगे हम लोग कि क्या क्या चेंजेस देखने को मिल रहा है प्राइस में.
Welcome into Yahoo Finance Live as we cross the noon Eastern Time trading hour. I'm Zach Guzman. Happy Friday, everybody, as we're seeing the major indices here pull back a bit to wrap up what's been a very volatile week And of course, we are watching where we're going to close and what could happen in the afternoon session, but we will be hearing the latest here from Fed Chair Jerome Powell in just a second. And of course, you call that volatility, what we saw with the major indices this week. Let's take a look at crypto as we're seeing crypto say, I'll show you volatility as Bitcoin is off by about 4%, Ethereum off close to 7%, as China cracks down on transactions, saying that those are going to be illegal. We'll highlight what the regulatory front, though, looks like back here at home with an interview from former Commodity Futures Trading Commission Chair Chris Giancarlo a bit later on in the show. But first, I want to spotlight, of course, what's been a very busy week for Fed Chair Jerome Powell, not only leading through that press conference earlier in the week and wrapping up the two-day policy meeting, but now on a listening mission to talk to businesses and people as they shift through the changing landscape here when it comes to the economy and what the post-COVID world might look like. And for more on that, Yahoo Finance's Brian Chung joins us once again to break that down. Brian?
Well, Zach, as you mentioned, the Fed speakers kind of jumping out of their hole after being locked up in that FOMC meeting, which we got the conclusion of earlier this week, where the Fed held interest rates at near zero, but said a tapering process of its $120 billion a month pace of asset purchases could come as soon as the Fed's next meeting in November. But what you're referring to with regards to the Fed's listening process has to do with the conference that they kicked off earlier today, headlined by the title Perspectives on the Pandemic Recovery. There were a number of different people representing different corners of the economy that were present in that conference today, namely a superintendent from a school district. There was an economist from the National Association of Manufacturers, and Jerome Powell himself participating in that conversation. Not much detail from him. He said the economy is experiencing, quote, fundamental shifts, and said that some even businesses are quote, meeting the demands of a new reality, suggesting that the post-pandemic economy could be very different than the pre-pandemic economy. Not much more color from the Fed chairman beyond that, but it does kind of supplement other Fed speak that we got this morning when you consider the Cleveland Fed president, Loretta Mester, talking about inflation. She says the upside risks to inflation are outweighing the downside risks to inflation. That might suggest a bit more of a hawkish view when it comes to the Fed's approach, not just the tapering, but even interest rate hikes at some point. And then we also heard from the Kansas City Fed president, Esther George, who was talking similarly in vein with what Powell said earlier today, with the idea of maybe employment having changed. Labor force participation hasn't bounced back as quickly as, say, inflation has in this recovery. And she said that she's, quote, open to the possibility that the pandemic has resulted in a number of structural changes in the labor market. That could also be a bit more of a hawkish tilt because, as we know, Fed officials are very closely watching the labor market recovery. And if there is permanent damage, maybe the line for when to normalize to get back to interest rate hikes might be a little bit lower for some of these Fed officials. But of course, we'll get a lot more commentary from the other Fed officials next week, including 2 days of testimony on Capitol Hill, where Fed Chairman Powell will be grilled by both the Senate and the House about the Fed's reaction function, but also on other topics, including the Fed's ethics code. So we'll definitely watch out for that next week as well, guys.
Yeah, that guy's been on a roll, and now more. Just when you got a light at the end of the tunnel, grilling planned in Congress. So we'll see what happens there. Brian Chung bringing us the latest. Appreciate it. I want to turn over to how best investors are digesting this and the best way to play kind of the updates we're getting, not just from the Fed, but companies moving forward with earnings still being impacted by the pandemic. And for more on that, happy to welcome in Matt Lockridge, Westwood Quality Value Fund Portfolio Manager. He joins us now. And Matt, happy Friday. Let's start off there. Happy Friday. You just heard Brian run through everything there in terms of what people got this week from the Fed and the latest thinking, tapering pretty well choreographed. But I'm looking at what's happened with Nike today and thinking about the fact that we are still seeing companies deal with supply chain issues, labor shortages. There is still a weight of the pandemic on us now. When you step back and look at kind of the volatility we saw this week, what should investors know about maybe playing the market moving forward?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. First of all, it has been a very volatile week. I think, some, as you mentioned earlier, after reviewing what the Fed had to say, thought they were a bit more hawkish. To us, they really just gave more clarity and specifics on the next few months and quarters. Jerome Powell talked about the next jobs report coming up, and that unless it's really bad, they're going to plan on tapering starting in November. And that tapering will last likely through the middle part of 2022. And so we can expect the first interest rate increase at the end of 22 or early 23. That all to us fit general consensus expectations. And I think as investors look forward, how do you prepare for that? Essentially, much of the monetary stimulus that's been in the market will slow and then exit. So as we get into this tightening phase, you're going to want to focus on those companies that have higher returns on invested capital, that can weather that increase in their cost of capital. And you also want companies, in our opinion, that are exhibiting positive earnings revisions. Over the last couple of years, we've really had a more macro-driven market. That to us is ending, and you can really look at individual securities, and you want to focus on those companies that are growing and that are.
सो देख सकते हैं याहू फाइनेंस पे हमारे सारे इंडेक्स नेगेटिव होते हैं, जिसकी वजह से गोल्ड एक बार वापस से स्पाइक मारते हुए देख सकते हैं 1753 के लेवल्स दिखाते हुए मिल रहा है.
Beating expectations, so that earnings revisions are moving up.
Yeah, I guess that's the big question now too, as we kind of see this global picture. And again, I'll use the example of Nike because that's the one we're seeing move today. A global picture of supply chain issues in other countries that are kind of lagging behind on vaccinations versus what's going on here in the U.S. There are some people who even earlier on in the pandemic were saying really lean into the small caps because you might not have as large an impact when it comes to the global economy here. But what would be your suggestion? I mean, there's sectors you like moving forward if we are indeed coming out of the worst of the pandemic that maybe people should be taking a second look at.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, the supply chain disruption is real. We're really hearing that across all sectors. You mentioned Nike, even FedEx talked about the labor shortages. So these bottlenecks or shortages, it's not just in semiconductors, but it's really in various parts of the supply chain. And so you want to be mindful of that. And obviously the larger companies, when you think of, for example, in the consumer space, retailers that can manage these shortages the best, they're generally going to be the larger companies, the Walmarts of the world, that as suppliers are going through inventory allocation, they're going to give it to their biggest customers, the customers that they know can show the best sell-through. And so generally the larger cap into the space should be able to manage some of these supply chain disruptions the best.
And we'll see if that's the case, of course, as we have earnings season to look forward to. We've kind of gone through the session of not much to talk about in the summer, waiting for the updates from the Fed. Now we got them. We'll see what lies ahead. But Matt Lockridge, Westwood Quality Value Fund Portfolio Manager, appreciate you taking the time. We started with Happy Friday. We'll end with have a great weekend, man. Good to see you. Take care. Going to turn our attention over to a couple tickers we're watching, though, in this sell-off in crypto as we see Bitcoin moving lower, off more than 3%. Kind of interesting to see not exactly as dramatic moves playing out in some of those levered to crypto. Coinbase only off by about 2%. Robinhood off by about the same margin. MicroStrategy, of course, which has poured billions into repeated purchases of Bitcoin, seeing a more than 3% move to the downside. Of course, interesting this time being triggered by China declaring crypto transactions illegal over there. A bit more different than just what we saw in the spring when they cracked down on crypto mining. So it'd be a step further down the line of the crackdown spectrum, if you want to call it that. Of course, ahead of their launch of the digital yuan planned in 2022 around the Beijing Olympics. Maybe some investors saying that it could be over-dramatized, the moves that we're seeing play out in the actual crypto space. Investors in these companies, at least, not selling off to exactly the same degree. Meantime, we're going to take another quick break here on the show and focus in on why that might be. What regulations look like back here in the U.S. We're going to have a discussion with the former Commodity Futures Trading Commission Chair, Christopher Giancarlo, speaking with Yahoo Finance Live, what the regulatory front looks like here in the U.S. Very different than what we're seeing play out in China. We're back in 2 minutes' time. Stay with us.
ओके, सो जैसे कि हम लोगों ने लाइव सेशन में पूरी तरीके से जेरोम पवेल के स्पीक देखे और उसकी वजह से देखे कि गोल्ड के वापस से लेवल्स अपसाइड आते हुए दिखे हैं. MT4 टर्मिनल पे आते हैं. MT4 टर्मिनल पे न्यूज़ के दौरान लगातार गोल्ड ने 1739, 1740 के लेवल्स के बाद से 1753 तक के लेवल्स बनाते हुए दिखाए. और अभी जब स्पीक हम लोग को बंद होती हुई दिखी है, उसके बाद से वापस से गोल्ड एक बार रिबाउंड करते हुए देखने को मिला थोड़ी स्टेबिलिटी के साथ। हम लोग आ जाते हैं अपने डिस्कशन पॉइंट पे। So gold lost its shine. Points to be covered today. How far will gold fall? Gold's immediate future. Gold down as Fed hints at faster than expected interest rate hikes. Gold price prediction. Price rebounds as dollar slips. Gold technical analysis. Gold settles slightly higher, extended gains after Fed policy statement. Gold prices ease as Fed signals quicker than expected rate hikes. Hot or cold gold contract. So how far will gold fall? जितना हम लोग को फॉल देखने को मिल चुका है, क्या इससे ज्यादा फॉल देखने को मिलेगा? So the FOMC meeting was not kind to gold. With a taper now almost nailed on this year and rates potentially rising from next, it seems gold's appeal in the beginning or to wane. The yellow metal was already on a downtrend trajectory in the weeks leading up to the Fed meeting, with traders seemingly of view that their determination to taper this year would not be derailed by weakening data and growing risk to outlook. And so turned out to be the case, although as ever there was plenty of room for maneuver should the situation warrant it, in which means the central bank has given itself a little extra time. As for what this means for gold's immediate future, it's not looking great. Of course, should certain situations unfold in a manner that could derail the taper, COVID, data, debt ceiling, etc., that will change. But the Fed is currently assuming it won't, and therefore so are the markets. So gold immediate future देख रहे हैं, गोल्ड के प्राइसेस 1740 पे हैं और हम लोग उम्मीद नहीं कर रहे हैं कि वापस से अपसाइड रिबाउंड करते हुए देखिए, हम लोग की उम्मीद अभी भी करेक्शन की है. So gold finds itself failing quite hard. After rotating off 1780 prior major support at around the 61.8 Fibonacci on the 4-hour chart, gold finds itself falling quite hard, and this week's low around 1740 now look within reach once more. A move below here could see 1700 back in focus. Gold finds itself falling quite hard. One thing worth noting is how much is now priced in. A taper this year most likely announced in November, जैसे कि हम लोग को देखने को मिला है. टेपरिंग की जो न्यूज है हम लोग को नवंबर में आने को देखने को मिलने वाली है. A rate hike late next year and no major downside risk materializing. The only thing missing is higher inflation or a faster recovery through the winter, both of which could hasten the Fed's tightening and accelerate gold decline. The momentum indicators, but there is a long list of uncertainties going into the final months of the year. And with so much now priced in, just because of the Fed is moving to a tightening path, it doesn't mean gold is free fall. So the momentum indicators will be interesting to watch in the coming weeks. Gold down as Fed hints at faster than expected interest rate hikes. Gold was down on Thursday morning in Asia with the US Federal Reserve signaling that asset tapering could begin with 2021 and that interest rate hike would come sooner than expected as well. Gold futures fell 0.80% to $1764.765 by 11:48 p.m. ET. The dollar, which usually moves inversely to gold, edged down after earlier gains on Thursday but remained near a 1 month high. Gold prices bounced for a third consecutive trading session. The sell off in the greenback helped provide tailwinds for the gold prices. US were mixed. US Treasury bond continued to attract traders. US home sales declined in the line with expectations. According to the National Association of Realtors, sales of previously owned dropped by 2% in August to an annualized rate of 5.88 million units. Sales were 1.5% lower than August 2020 for the first annual decline in 14 months. एक बार आ जाते हैं अपने MT4 टर्मिनल पे तो प्राइसेस वापस से एक बार तेजी के साथ 1753.2123 के लेवल्स बनते हुए प्राइसेस वापस से एक रिकवरी के साथ देखने को मिल रहा है 1753.2840 के लेवल्स पे लगातार हम लोग को तेजी देखने को मिली है 5 मिनट कैंडल का एक बार मूव देखें तो 5 मिनट कैंडल देख सकते हैं कितनी अच्छी तेजी के साथ देखने को मिल रहा है अपसाइड रिबाउंड करते हुए 1740 के लेवल से वापस से एक बहुत अच्छी तेजी देखने को मिल रहा है 1753.2326 के लेवल्स और अभी भी उम्मीद है कि आज की क्लोजिंग हम लोग को 1760 तक के लेवल्स दिखाते हुए मिल सकते हैं 1 मिनट कैंडल फॉर्मेशन देखें तो 1 मिनट कैंडल फॉर्मेशन भी पूरी तरीके से अपसाइड रिबाउंड करती हुई सेवनटीन 53.41 के लेवल्स वापस से हम लोग आते हैं अपने न्यूज सेक्शन पे हम लोग डिस्कशन पॉइंट्स पे आते हैं So gold prices bounced for a third consecutive trading session. The sell-off in the greenback helped provide tailwinds for the gold price. US sales were mixed. US Treasury bond continued to attract traders. US home sales declined in line with expectations. According to the National Association of Realtors, sales of previously owned dropped 2% in August to an annualized rate of 5.88 million units. Sales were 1.5% lower than August 2020 for the first time, annual decline in 14 months. Gold prices rebounded but continued to form a bear flag pattern. This pattern is a continuation event that pauses before refreshes lower. Price remained below resistance seen near the 10-day moving average at 1790. Target support is seen near the August low at 1677. The 10-day moving average has crossed below the 50-day moving average, which means that a short-term downtrend is now in place. Short-term momentum has reversed and turned positive as the fast stochastic generated a crossover buy signal. So medium-term momentum has turned negative as the MACD index generated a crossover signal. The sell signal occurs at the MACD line, day moving average, minus the 26 moving average, cross above the MACD line. The MACD histogram is printing in negative territory with a downward sloping trajectory with points to the lower prices. So gold prices settled with a modest gain on Wednesday, then moved up further higher. Further, after a Federal Reserve official signaled that they are almost ready to taper their bond buying and expect to raise interest by late 2022, December gold GCJ 21 minus 0.78% was at $1785.80 an ounce in electronic trading, following a settlement at $1778.80, up 60 cents or 0.03% for the session. आते हैं MT4 टर्मिनल पे वापस से एक बार, क्योंकि हम लोग की 15 मिनट कैंडल की क्लोजिंग का टाइम होने वाला है. पूरी तरीके से स्टेबल होती है मार्केट. $1752.61 हमारी कैंडल 4 मिनट में क्लोज होने वाली है. देख सकते हैं पूरी तरीके से स्टेबल होती है और मार्केट का मूवमेंट खत्म हो चुका है क्योंकि स्पीक हम लोग की खत्म. $1752.6368 के लेवल्स पे 2 मिनट बाद इस कैंडल की क्लोजिंग का टाइम. और जिस तरीके से शॉर्ट डोजी कैंडलस्टिक लास्ट बनी हुई है, हमारी उम्मीद है कि नेक्स्ट कैंडल शॉर्ट डोजी के साथ ही क्लोज देती हुई वापस से एक जो दूसरी कैंडल बनेगी वो 53 तक के लेवल्स वापस से मार्केट के रेडार में लाती हुई दिख सकती है. $1752.51 थोड़ी सी करेक्शन के साथ 2 मिनट बाद इस कैंडल की क्लोजिंग का टाइम है. देख सकते हैं जिस टाइम तक हम लोग को स्पीक देखने को मिला उस टाइम तक मार्केट में फ्लक्चुएशन बहुत अच्छी, और अब वापस से मार्केट हमारी थोड़ी सी स्टेबिलिटी की ओर 1752-53 के लेवल्स के बीच में. 1752.61 हम लोग को जहां तक लग रहा है आज की क्लोजिंग 1750 टू 1755 के बीच में ही देखने को मिलेगी। बट आज जैसे कि हम लोग जानते हैं फ्राइडे क्लोजिंग हमारी वीकली क्लोजिंग है, तो मार्केट बहुत ही अनएक्सपेक्टेड क्लोजिंग आज के दिन दिखाती हुई मिलती है। हमारी दूसरी कैंडल फॉर्मेशन और लगातार करेक्शन के साथ दूसरी कैंडल एज स्पीक एंडेड, तो मार्केट वापस से अपने करंट जोन पे आती हुई, और अगर ऐसे ही करेक्शन दिखाती है तो 1750 1747 के लेवल्स वापस से रेडार पे आते हुए दिखेंगे। 1752 के लेवल्स पे फिलहाल मूवमेंट दिखाते हुए। सेवनटीन 51.7381 के लेवल्स पे प्राइसेस मूव करते हुए हमारी दूसरी 15 मिनट कैंडल जो कि थोड़ी सी करेक्शन के साथ फिलहाल देखने को मिल रही है, बहुत ही तेजी के साथ वापस से हम लोग को एक बार ये कैंडल थोड़ी सी डाउन होती हुई दिख रही है। आ जाते हैं डिस्कशन पॉइंट पे, तो हम लोग डिस्कस कर रहे थे gold settles slightly higher extend gains after Fed policy meetings. So gold prices settled with a modest gain on Wednesday, then moved up further after Federal Reserve officials signaled that they are almost ready to taper their bond buying and expect to raise interest rate by late 2022. So December gold GCZ 21 minus 0.78% was at 1785.80 an ounce in electronic trading, following a settlement at 1778.80, up 60 cents or 0.03% for the session. Gold prices ease as Fed signals quicker than expected rate hikes. Gold price dipped on Thursday after the US Federal Reserve signaled easing its monthly bond purchases by next year and sooner than expected interest rate hikes, which could increase the opportunity cost of holding the non-yielding bullion. Hot cold gold contract देख सकते हैं. So gold flat as investors brace for evergreen risk Fed policy decision. Gold prices were flat on Wednesday amid rising uncertainties triggered by China evergreen's trade crisis. And anticipation of policy cues from the US Federal Reserve on its timeline for reducing stimulus for the world largest economy. Gold versus other precious metal, तो गोल्ड पेटल देख सकते हैं हमारा 0.62 पॉइंट्स की गिरावट के साथ, गोल्ड गुनिया 0.70 पॉइंट्स की गिरावट के साथ, गोल्ड मिनी 0.76 पॉइंट्स की गिरावट, गोल्ड पेटल 0.70% की गिरावट, गोल्ड गुनिया एंड गोल्ड मिनी हम लोग एक्सपायरी के हिसाब से देख रहे हैं कि किस तरीके से चेंजेस देखने को मिल रहे हैं। सो आ जाते हैं वापस से अपने MT4 टर्मिनल पे, तो देख सकते हैं वापस से एक बार रिबाउंड करते हुए 1752.35 के लेवल्स पे। $1752.35 के लेवल्स पे प्राइसेस मूव करते हुए 1752.5859। सो आप लोग के पास 4 मिनट का टाइम है। अगर आप लोग की साइड से कोई भी क्वेरी हो तो आप लोग मेंशन कर सकते हैं। $1752.54। $1752.5759 के मोमेंट देख सकते हैं प्राइसेस पूरी स्टेबल हो चुके हैं लास्ट 3 कैंडल से 45 मिनट से बेसिकली। सो अगर आप लोग को सारी चीज़ें क्लियर हो रही हैं देन ओके। अगर कोई भी क्वेरी हो, कोई भी डाउट्स हो तो आप लोग कमेंट सेक्शन में मेंशन कर सकते हैं। तीन मिनट का टाइम है। अगर कोई भी क्वेरी हो तो आप लोग कमेंट सेक्शन में मेंशन कर सकते हैं। दो मिनट का टाइम है। अगर कोई भी क्वेरी हो तो आप लोग सबमिट कर सकते हैं और अदरवाइज हम लोग आगे की चीज़ें फ्राइडे के सेशन में डिस्कस करेंगे। वापस से करेक्शन देखने को मिल रही है। सो हम लोग आज का सेशन यहीं पे एंड करेंगे क्योंकि हम लोगों ने सारी चीज़ें डिस्कस कर ली है। सेशन एंड करने का टाइम भी हो चुका है और आई होप आप लोग को सारी चीज़ें क्लियर हो गई क्योंकि लाइव सेशन में कोई भी कमेंट्स देखने को नहीं मिल रहा है। सो थैंक यू सो मच फॉर ज्वाइनिंग एंड कंसंट्रेटिंग एंड फॉर योर प्रीशियस टाइम। हम लोग आज का सेशन यहीं पे एंड कर रहे हैं और बाकी की चीज़ें हम लोग संडे के सेशन में डिस्कस करेंगे। सो थैंक यू सो मच।